recorded. And it will be on the basis of county contracting. And our next one will be next Wednesday night, which will cover IT contracts. Both topics are abbreviated versions. Again, as I mentioned, it's a taste of a 3-day course that Truc actually offers to a county workforce. May it spark consideration of county contracting as a potential career path to those that are here participating with us. And I will be dropping some chat in a chat, some resources for you to check out, like our website. And so maybe you can join us and help us out and volunteer because we need the help. So throughout the presentation, please feel free to drop your questions in the chat as well, and we'll try to get to your questions. And lastly, before we begin, to limit any potential distractions during this presentation, please mute your mics unless you're being called upon to speak. Okay, so without further delay, Truc, please take it away.
Hi, everyone. I think everyone can hear me because I see my box is lighting up. Like Jody said, I've been with the county for quite a while. I started in, April of 2007. And I've been with the county counsel's office ever since. And my clients at their county are actually most of the county departments because I specialize in special high-level dollar IT procurement and then very sophisticated professional services agreements. So I get to work with pretty much all of the county departments when they have those types of procurements and they need a certain attorney to handle it. So a lot of you I've worked with, and excuse my dog, a lot of you I have worked with. Hold on, let me put the dog outside. Okay, now the dog is outside. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to share my screen. If I can figure out how to do that. So let's see. Am I able to share my screen? I don't see. Oh, here it is. Share screen.
The share screen, the green.
Yes. Yeah, I see it. And I've got 3 screens on at home. So let's see here. All right. Okay, now, are you guys able to see my presentation?
Yes.
Okay, are you seeing notes as well or just the full presentation?
Just the full presentation.
Oh, okay, but you know, you're seeing my notes and you're not supposed to see the notes. So
no, we don't
that?
see your notes. We don't see your note.
Okay, so you only see the slide.
Yes, just a slide.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, with that said, I'm going to turn my camera off, but I am here because I noticed that when I have my camera on and I'm presenting at home, it sometimes causes the screen to freeze. So let me see if I'm able to turn off my camera. Okay, I'm not seeing that I'm able to turn off my camera. Let's see. No. Well, we will try to do our best and hopefully it doesn't freeze. Okay, let's see. Maybe it's show task. Okay, can you guys still see the screen?
Yes, and you did manage to turn off your camera, so you're good.
Okay, fantastic. So the presentation that you guys are getting tonight is a much more condensed version of the larger 3-day general county contracts training that ISD, County Counsel, CO Risk Management, and Auditor Controller puts on. And it's also a smaller condensed version of a 2-day training that we teach our county council attorneys. Our county council attorneys also go through a very similar county contracts training. I'm going to be providing you guys a lot of information and materials and concepts in the next hour and a half to kind of give you an introduction of overall county contracting. But I do recommend, and I think it's important that for a lot of you out there in department land, that you guys actually take the 3-day countywide contracts training that is put on by ISD as the lead, and your departments can sign you up for that. But this is going to give you a great introduction on what kind of procurements and contracts that you'll be dealing with. Okay, so for today, the goal of today is to give you an overview of county contracting. And it's going to start with the analysis of, what is the county contracting for? What is the legal authority the department is relying on to contract? Is a competitive solicitation required? And once you answer those questions, what is the proper procurement and solicitation method? And we're going to give you an overview of the solicitation process that the county uses. And we're going to kind of show you, what solicitation documents look like that end up giving you the resulting contract that you'll take it to the board. And then I'll also walk you through a general proposal evaluation process that is run for our contracts under the county, under county informed averaging processes adopted by the board. Okay, we're also going to briefly touch on contract negotiations when it's needed and the county approval process for contracts. And then we're going to look at county contracts and what's in a county contract. And I'm going to give you a brief introduction and understanding of the types of contractual indemnity requirements that are put in our contracts and the types of insurance requirements that are put in our contracts and that are required by CO risk management. And then I'm going to briefly touch today on Prop A contracts and living wage requirements of the board. And then I'm going to give you a very quick ethical obligations understanding on when you're dealing with county contracting. And it's simply going to boil down to whether there is a financial interest. And if that's the case, you need to pull yourself off of that type of procurement. And then I'll briefly go over other contracting considerations. And for tonight, I'm only going to focus us on retroactive contracts because I'm starting to see that some of the county departments are falling into that, where they're letting their contracts or contract amendments lapse. And then they don't have a contract and they're trying to revive it improperly. Okay. And then we'll do a wrap up and I'll show you where you can get all of your procurement documents and contract boilerplates on the ISD's website.
I'm on the phone, but I don't know how to. Do you know how to do this so I can get it on the
I think I'm hearing somebody who's okay, well, I'm going to keep going. So, on our training, we always love to show this slide, this cartoon, and it says, these new terms and conditions you've drafted for us are extremely long and overly complicated. Our customers are not going to be able to understand that. Well done. And I think, a lot of our contractors sometimes, and even our county department folks, feel like sometimes the county contracting process is really, really difficult and complicated to understand. And we're going to try and break that down for you today so that you can have an understanding of what it looks like. Okay. All right. So course objectives, again, you got to understand your department's authority to contract. And you're going to be able to, hopefully, after taking this training, be able to assess the need for your department, to evaluate whether they need to do a procurement and what alternatives they have. And you'll be able to help your department identify the appropriate solicitation methods and documents and terms and conditions that need to be included. And of course, you should be able to help your department review the solicitation and the sample contract before it goes out on the street. Okay, again, you'll also understand key steps in the solicitation process. You'll understand Prop A contracts, and you shall be able to understand other contracting considerations like insurance, risk management, and of course, as we discussed, ethical obligations with contracting. I hope that you walk away from tonight's training being able to conduct this key analysis in 4 easy steps, okay? And that first step starts with, you ask yourself, anytime when you're asked to work on a contracting matter, you should ask yourself, what is the county contracting for? And then once you complete that analysis, you need to be able to ask, well, what is the legal authority that is being used by my department to contract? And once that determination is made, then you're going to move to ask, well, once I know I can contract, what's the appropriate procurement or solicitation method? And then from there, you should be able to check and confirm, the contract you're going to use, does it have the correct requirements and provisions? Okay, and that's the key analysis that you should always be going through when you are put to work on a contracting matter. Okay, so if there are no questions or comments, I'm going to go to the next section. And I don't see, because I have so many screens up, I don't see anything in the chat.
There was a
correct?
question about whether you can provide the PowerPoint presentation later on.
I can, okay, but see, I want to be able to make sure that I answer your questions in real time, because this
Okay.
training works best if I am able to answer your questions and
Got it.
on the spot, and I need to see everybody's answer. So why can I not see the chat anymore? Let me see. Okay, I think I can see the chat now. Can you guys see the chat screen on my screen?
No.
Okay, good. Because I've got 3 screens up and it seems to be duplicating itself. Okay, great. Yes,
If
so
it comes up, I can read it off for you.
Okay, I see the chat up now.
Okay.
On the screen. I just have to pull it over to another screen. Okay, yes, you will be getting a copy of the PowerPoint presentation. When at the end of I'll have let's say I'll email it out.
And then Truc, we do also have some, I guess, non-county employees, and community orgs and so forth. So maybe you can also address them. I know it's supposed to be a very condensed webinar, but if possible, if you can also address them.
And yes, if they have questions, I mean, I would go ahead and put that in the chat.
Okay.
And you guys can go from there. And it's good for me to know that there are non-county folks on here.
Mhm.
Okay, so the first analysis that I wanted everyone to be able to understand and ask is, what is the county contracting for? Okay, very important, because depending on what you're contracting for, whether it's goods or services, it'll help identify the procurement method and the type of contract that you're going to be using. And so you want to look at what you're working at, and you want to ask yourselves, am I buying goods, materials, software, professional services, general services, A&E, engineering service, or a combo of both, right? And depending on what it is, it will control what procurement method and what type of legal authority you'll need to use. And you guys should know that the county contracts for a lot of big and little and most mundane and most incredible things. We procure everything from pencils and, screws and widgets to massive helicopters that are used for firefighting. And those are all things that are purchased for the county. We buy medical equipment. We buy equipment to do maintenance and landscaping. We buy a lot of stuff for the hospitals, but we also procure a lot of, very important professional services for the county. We also procure quite a bit of software and SaaS services and information technology type items for the county. And so we really, really procure everything, and we need services for everything, as well. We've got audit services, auction services. We contract for services to run our golf courses. I don't know if you guys knew this, but the county actually has golf courses that it runs. And we have telecommunication services with big telecom firms that provide services to the county. We also do parking management at our beaches and at our county facilities. So there's a lot of things that the county contracts for in the services arena as well. And then I've gone over, the stuff goods that the county contracts for. Now that you know what the county is contracting for, you need to ask, okay, now what is the legal authority to buy what I need? What is the legal authority for my goods and services? And you should understand that the county's legal authority to contract is really permitted and provided for under the state constitution or by state statute or by county charter. And you guys might ask yourself, well, why the state constitution? Well, the county is actually a political, all the counties in California are actual political subdivisions of the state of California. And so the California Constitution has certain provisions, you know, for how the counties act as a political subdivision of the state. And of course, you know, we have state law and state statutes that provide as well for contracting authority for the counties that are in the state of California. And then we also have our own local county charter that's enacted by the voters that also has rules on county contracting as well. And so the permitted legal authority boils down essentially to the authority that the Board of Supervisors had, the authority that the purchasing agent, as the director of ISD, has to purchase essentially widgets and certain services under a dollar limit for the county. And it boils down to delegated authority as well that is given to the department heads, usually by the Board of Supervisors. And then, of course, there's the statutory authority that provides for certain department heads to be able to procure, not much, but, you know, that does have, you know, some certain provisions. You guys should know that contracts that are made without the proper legal authority, government public contracts that are made without the proper legal authority are actually void, okay, are legal and void under law. Here's a recital of the various code sections that we use quite a bit, that the county uses quite a bit when it's exercising its authority to contract. I will send this out so you guys can have it. And here's the authority that prescribes for what the purchasing agent has. And there's certain authority that the purchasing agent has under these various code sections. I will send that out. A lot of you, especially if you're from ISD, are very familiar with the purchasing agent's contracting authority. Generally, the purchasing agent for non-Prop A service contracts, and we'll touch what Prop A is later on in the presentation, but the purchasing agent has up to, for service contracts, right, to be able to get into services and procure services for the county, they have up to $200,000 a year annually, okay, annually, not per contract. Previously, the law was unclear if it was $200,000 annually, and there was a clarification that was done a few years ago to make it clear that it's $200,000 a year. But with respect to goods, what I like to call widgets, and widgets can be millions of dollars or 10 cents, right? With respect to the purchase of goods, the purchasing agent actually has unlimited authority to purchase goods without having board approval to purchase it. However, ISD requires that the departments must obtain board approval to purchase or finance any good with a unit cost of $250,000 or more prior to submitting the purchase order to the purchasing agent. And so you will see on the county board agendas, departments saying, I'm going to be asking ISD to buy, you know, 10 widgets for me, and each widget is $300,000. And, you know, can you please approve that? And then ISD will wait for the department to go to the board and get that approval, and then it will cut the purchase order to purchase it for that department, or to procure it and purchase it for that department. But otherwise, ISD does not have to return back to the board before it can cut that purchase order, because as the purchasing agent, when it buys goods, it can buy it in an unlimited amount without first having to go to the board. The purchasing agent also exercises this rule that we call 70-30 rule, where sometimes when the purchasing agent buys things, right, and it's a commodity or a widget or a good, there are services associated with it. and to not violate, you know, the fact that he only has up to 200, that rule of 200,000. We usually require that that where the purchasing agency is buying goods and services, that the services component not be more than 30%. Okay, and the best example of that is, you know, we procure, let's say, air conditioners, you know, at the county, and we buy a whole bunch of air conditioners. Well, when you buy air conditioners, usually what comes with that is the maintenance for the air conditioning. And so if the air conditioners, let's say, cost $10 million, and the cost to maintain those air conditioners by the company that you bought it from is only, let's say, 100,000 a year, right? Then you've met the, you don't have an issue, because the services component of it, the maintenance portion of it, was only 100,000 a year, you know, and the purchase of the air conditioning was, you know, 10 million. So you don't exceed the 30% rule. And so you will see contracts or purchase orders where the purchasing agent will go out, buy it, and you'll see that there's a services component on it. And sometimes that services component is going to exceed 200,000. But as long as that service component is only 30%, the purchasing agent is able to buy it. All right, department head delegated authority. You guys should be aware that sometimes, you know, specific departments have delegated additional contract authority. For example, you know, the director of DPW can do construction contracts up to 75,000 without having to go to the board. And then CEO through it's the DAA, it's delegated authority agreements, will sometimes cut out consultant contracts without having to go to the board. And then, of course, auditor controller has authority to do audit services contracts without having to go to the board. And that's actually set in state law. And then the treasurer tax collector also has authority to do bank services contracts. But you guys should know, generally, you know, well, let me get to that part. So generally, all department heads also have contract authority to do a PO up to $5,000, which isn't very much, unless they're approved by ISD to do purchase orders, you know, for widgets up to 15,000. And I'm going to show you a chart of all the departments that have purchasing agent authority up to $15,000 very shortly. Department heads also actually have authority to enter into training services without having to go to the board. And that can be done at the departmental level. And then they can do, you know, this quote unquote Prop A contracts up to 25,000. And you're going to hear me talk a lot about Prop A, which I'll tell you about at the end. I will tell you, though, that it is very rare for a department head to do a Prop A contract under their authority up to 25,000, because Prop A contracts are not usually $25,000. It's a very low limit. And everything that's usually a Prop A contract is well in exceedance of that. Okay, so but if you look in this, you're saying, wow, this is pretty low. So here are the departments that have the $15,000 department head delegated authority from the purchasing agent. Your department will know if it has that authority, because it would have received a memo from the purchasing agents saying that they had it up to 15,000. Now, you know, 15,000 is not very much. So you're able to do, departments are able to do very small dollar purchase orders under 15,000, but for most part, most departments will have to end up going to the purchasing agent. Okay. Now, back to the department heads awarding contracts. You know, I want everyone to be clear that departments really can only award contracts in exceedance of those values that I discussed, which were very low. If, you know, the board through board action has delegated authority to the department, you know, and if the board has not otherwise delegated authority to the department to award the contract, then that department usually needs to go to the board, okay, for review and approval and award of the contract, unless, you know, it's a purchase of widgets that ISD can purchase. And even separately, if the widget is over 250,000, they would have to go to the board anyway and ask for permission before ISD cuts the purchase order. Now, I tell our county councils this, and I tell my departments all the time when they reach out to me, hey, Truc, I have delegated authority to award this contract. And I'm like, oh, you do? I need to see the board letter or the board motion, that says that. So when you guys are working on a county contract and you think it can be awarded, you have to have a copy of your board letter, a board motion, because you can expect that your county counsel attorney is going to ask you for a copy of it. Okay. So keep that in mind. You should also know that, aside from CEO who administers the DAAs, it's not typical for a department head to have authority to award a contract at any really. It's not typical, but these days, I know for like the homeless initiatives, there's been delegated authority. And so you guys just need to be careful that if you're taking the position that your department has departmental authority, that you actually have a copy of the board motion or the board letter that gives the department a copy, that gives the department that delegated authority. And of course, the CEO's DAA agreements. I don't know if anyone on here has been, their department has been the recipient or beneficiary of a DAA. Sometimes the CEO will cut DAAs for different departments. Their general rule is that, they like to limit the contracting spend in any year to like 100,000. But of course, it's not a firm rule. It's just kind of their rule of thumb on how they want to treat their DAs. But that's not always the case, but that's kind of their rule of thumb. Okay, so we're going to do a hypo. This is going to feel like you guys are in law school, but I know a lot of you haven't gone to law school, but this is kind of going to test if everyone's been listening. So in our hypo, your department wants to procure professional consulting services at a cost of $5,000 a year for 5 years. Who has authority to award this contract? And you guys can type it into the chat if you feel like participating. You can yell it out, as I'll kind of pause, but look at it again. Your department wants to procure professional consulting services at a cost of $400,000 a year for 5 years. So can ISD do it? No, ISD cannot do it for you because ISD's professional services contracting limit is only $200,000 a year. So this is a contract that would have to go to the board for approval unless the board already delegated authority to the department to award this contract. Okay. All right. Next hypo. The fire department wants to ask ISD to issue a purchase order for 5 helicopters to help fight fires in this upcoming busy fire season. The 5 helicopters each cost $5 million with a total cost of $25 million. Can ISD issue a purchase order for these helicopters? Yes, ISD can issue a purchase order for these helicopters because these helicopters are in essence treated as goods, i.e. widgets. But before ISD will issue that purchase order for 5 helicopters at $5 million, they're going to require the fire department to go to the board and get permission from the board for ISD to cut those purchase orders. Okay. Now, what if the fire department wants to buy 10 helicopters with a total cost of $50 million? The answer is still the same. ISD absolutely can buy 10 helicopters for $50 million for the fire department without going to the board. But the fire department separately has to first go to the board and tell the board that it wants to buy 10 helicopters at $50 million. Okay, and then get approval from the board before ISD will actually issue the purchase order. And the value isn't based on the total value of the purchase, it's based on the value of the item. And in this case, since the item is over 250,000, the unit price is over 250,000, right? It's like $5 million a helicopter. They would have to go to the board. Okay. Okay. Hypo 3. Your department wants to ask ISD to issue a purchase order for special technical professional services. The professional services will cost $100,000 a year for 5 years. Can ISD issue this purchase order for these professional services? Why or why not? If you guys, wow, I see you guys are all answering. If you guys are answering or thinking, yes, ISD can issue this purchase order because it's only $100,000 a year, then you are correct because the legal limit for the purchasing agent is $200,000 a year for services that he issues under his authority as the purchasing agent. Okay, so yes, the purchasing agents can absolutely do this. What if the professional services cost $200,000 a year for 7 years? The answer is still the same. It doesn't matter that it's 7 years, so it's 2 years longer. The cost is still $200,000. Okay. What if the professional services cost $500,000 a year for 7 years? Well, in this case, it doesn't matter that it's for 7 years, but it absolutely matters that it's $500,000 a year, because the purchasing agent can only procure services that are $200,000 a year. Okay. All right. Any questions or comments? I don't see. I'll pause. I'm looking in the chat. I don't see any questions or comments. All right. Well, we will keep going. All right. So now that you know what you're looking at, and we've gone through, you know what you're buying, and you know what your contracting authority is. The next analysis you're actually going to do is you're going to ask, is a competitive solicitation required? Do you have to put this out competitively so that people, can bid on it, so that people have an opportunity who qualified to bid on it? The first way for you to tell if you need to put it out competitively is you can actually do a request for information, what we call an RFI, where you can put out essentially a market survey, and you can ask any type of information and kind of gauge the interest from your potential vendors. You can ask them to share their developments, their technology, their products. You can ask them to share pricing. You can ask them, to answer your questions about project price estimates, so that you can get an understanding on what the cost is for the type of product or service that you're looking at. But the RFI is really put out there to kind of give you information. It's actually not a solicitation process. It's a process to help you determine if you need to run a solicitation. And it should never result in contract award. I've had client departments come to me and say to me, I put out an RFI and I got 10 potential contractors that came to me, and I just want to award to this one contractor. And I'm like, okay, well, the fact that you've got 10 people, 10 contractors that responded to your RFI indicates to me that you don't have a sole source justification to award from an RFI. The only time that it could theoretically result in an RFI going to contract award is if it identifies to you that like, let's say only one person responds, and you check it and it identifies to you that there's a possible sole source. And then you would still have to follow the sole source procurement process, to be able to bring on that vendor. Okay, but always keep that in mind. An RFI generally does not result in a contract award. You can't take the stuff that people gave you and then pick somebody and then take an award to a potential contract for award to the board. Okay. All right. So the RFI, as indicated, could potentially result in a source. Most times it will identify to you that you need to run a solicitation because you're getting a lot of responses and feedback from folks. But sometimes, you get the market survey back and you're like, wow, I thought this was only going to cost like $1 million to do, and everybody it's charging like $50 million, and that's not in my budget, right? And you might hold off because you don't have that money, or you may not have that money in your budget for years to come. And so it could result in informing you that you don't need to move forward. Okay, so sole source contract. So let's pick up from there. What is a sole source contract? A sole source contract is any contract that's entered into without a competitive process. So let's say you run the RFI and you find out you only got one guy, or you don't even run an RFI because you have been able to meet the board policy provisions of a sole source in section 5.100. If you do that, you have to, if you're looking at a sole source, you should always make sure that you pull board policy 5.100 and that you're meeting the requirements and the guidelines that are set forth in that board policy for sole source. There's also a checklist that you have to fill out that the CEO's office also has to sign off on. So you got to make sure that you're meeting those requirements because you've got another department checking. If you are doing an IT contract that you're doing sole source, that sole source checklist is not only checked by the CEO, but it's also checked by the CIO as well. The board policy 5100 sets forth what the board approval requirements are for sole source, and it actually really importantly sets out the notification requirements. And let me get to that because sometimes departments unfortunately miss the notification requirements. So before you can negotiate a contract with a vendor for a sole source contract, you actually have to give the board advance written notice 4 weeks before you start contract negotiations for a new sole source contract. And if you are trying to do a sole source contract where you're extending an existing contract that's already out of, all the money and is out and the term is out, or it's about to expire, that contract is about to expire and you want to add on to it, you're actually supposed to do it 6 months in advance, written notification to the board. So please do not miss these time requirements if you're pursuing a sole source, because that time is needed to give the board the opportunity to review the notification and reach out to a department and say, what is this about? Each of the board offices, okay? So please make sure that you're meeting either the 4 weeks notification for new sole source contract and the 6 months notification if it's an existing contract before you start contract negotiations for the board. Sometimes the CEO and CIO will require you to bring your sole source notice to cluster, to the ops cluster or the public safety cluster or whatever cluster that your department is in, and brief it to the board offices before they can even file it with the board of supervisors. So please make sure that you're meeting these requirements. Let's say after you run your RFI or you don't run your RFI, you decide, God, I really need to procure something. But is there an existing contract, master agreement that's in place already at the county that I can just buy off of so that I don't have to run another procurement? And the answer is yes. One of the best things that you could do is if you determine that you need, goods or services, is to reach out to and look at this website, procurement.lacounty.gov, master agreements, and see if there's an existing master agreement countywide that allows county departments to buy off of it just by doing a work order solicitation, and then getting and buying it directly off of the contracts that we already have. Okay, so that will allow you to skip the actually having to go out and run in a competitive procurement because somebody else has already done that for you and set up the master agreement. So when I send out the slides, please, take a look at this procurement.lacounty.gov website. It's only for the intranet. And so it's only located on the intranet. So the folks who are not within the county would not be able to see what master agreements exist in here. Of course, you could do a search, through the board agenda and find those master agreements, but it's not going to be all in one place for you. So this is what the ISD's website is and where their countywide master agreements are listed. And it's, ISD just updated their website. So their materials are fantastically placed and very easy to find. And then this is what the text looks like, or the index looks like, of all the master agreements that are in place. And it will actually tell you if it can be utilized by all the departments countywide. And then it will tell you the person to reach out to so that they can help you put out the work order solicitation to buy under the existing agreement. So this is a great resource. I hope you guys afterwards, especially the county folks, spend some time on ISD's procurement website to find the great materials and the exemplars that are there that I will be highlighting to you throughout the training. Okay. All right. So once you've decided that you need, to do a competitive solicitation, right, you're going to have to identify, well, which solicitation method should I be using? And the factors that will determine what type of solicitation method that you're going to use to result in the county contract for your goods and services will fall under, you're going to ask yourself, do I need to evaluate costs? What is my timing and schedule, okay, for the proposed services? What are my funding requirements? And, what kind of goods or services am I looking at? And, do I need a pool of vendors for a lot of different projects, or do I need one vendor? So those are the kind of things that you're going to be analyzing. And my recommendation is you should be analyzing that with your project team and with your county counsel. I cannot highlight this enough. I think it's really important. You'll see this in the slides that, you should be working when you're working on a solicitation. You should be working with your county counsel at the onset. Not after you've put the procurement out on the street and your county counsel did not get a chance to review it. You should be really, engaging them from the beginning. So the types of procurement solicitations that you can work on, IFBs, they're invitation for bids, RFPs, which are requests for proposals, RFSQs, which are requests for statement of qualifications. And then, we've got, so those three are really the main ones that the county uses. We also have, other unique solicitations like, an RFCP and RFSI, and our procurements, right, which are not used very often. The ones that are used the most often is the IFB, the RFP, and the RFSQ. Okay, so my practice pointers, like I said, please work with your county counsel from the outset when drafting and preparing these solicitations. I will tell you that the solicitations I work on are very large, and my client departments, I'm there at day one. The kickoff meeting for the procurement, I'm there, and we're working on it together, and, they're running ideas by me. And that's the best way to make sure that there's not errors, that things don't go out without your county counsel not knowing, or that making sure there's no legal errors that are in there, right? And that's the best way to obviously put down any potential protests later on down the line. Your county counsel should be reviewing and improving the solicitations prior to release, approving them as to form. Okay, I will tell you the procurements that I work on, none of my departments put it out until I've had, multiple review of it. But I hear from some of my colleagues that that's not the case for them. Sometimes their client departments put things out and then, they get a contract before them. And so I really encourage you guys, especially the really large dollar procurements or the complicated ones, or, the ones where you think there might be a protest because, you've had the same vendor for the last 10 years and now you want to put it back out. And if you think that if they don't win it, they may protest, or you've got, a new contractor in town who wants that business and they really want it, or if, you're doing a solicitation that, we've never done before, and that we've never purchased those types of services for the county before. Those are the types of things where you want to reach out to county counsel early, okay, and get them working with you. All right, so what's an IFB? An IFB is an invitation for bid, and it results in one or multiple contracts. Out of all the three procurement methods that I shared with you, the IFB is actually the easiest one because it's very strict in the sense that it's got very well-defined project requirements and goods, and the price is it really comes down to price. It's always awarded to the lowest responsive and responsible bidder. And it always goes, to the lowest responsive and responsible bidder, as long as that bidder meets the minimum requirements. And the minimum requirements in an IFB, usually you have to have, some minimum experience, and the product, usually IFBs are only usually used for products. The product is the product that the bidder is submitting pricing on meets the minimum requirements of the product that's in the IFB. Okay, but other than that, it's nothing else is scored because the contract analyst will determine that the bidder met the minimum requirements for like usually for its expertise, and then that the product meets the minimum requirements, and then they award based on costs. There's no evaluators and there's no evaluation committee. Okay, so I see on here, why does it require longer notification justification of existing contract than when pursuing a new sole source contract? That's a good question. I believe the reason is because the board wants to know that you are continuing to give you're continuing to give the same vendor more work. And so they want to know in advance of that so that they can ask you questions. If it's a new vendor, you know, they don't have a history with the county, but if you're adding on to an existing, they really want to know that, you know, you're trying to give more work to the same vendor, okay, in advance of that. Okay. IFB typical uses, as I indicated, it's really used for kind of, you know, goods, computers, vehicles, supplies, radios. It can be used in construction services and public works contracts. And sometimes they're used for services where the services are really their services are easy to meet, and it just goes down to price. And best example of that is, you know, trash pickup contracts, right? It's easy to determine that you can pick up trash. The county would specify, I need 50 trash pickups in a day. You know, tell me your experience your experience picking up the trash, and then of course, what is your price? And then once they can demonstrate that they can meet the minimum requirements for the trash pickup, then, you know, we look at price, okay? But IFBs are not typically used where you want to be able to evaluate the quality and the experience of the vendor. That's usually done in an IFB. So again, an IFB is awarded to the lowest responsive and responsible bidder. Lowest responsive and responsible bidder is the person who's got the lowest price. Okay, and of course the price has to be reasonable. The price bidder can't just underbid it and then change the contract price on you after it's been awarded. And of course the bidder has to meet the minimum requirements that are specified in the IFB. This is the workflow for the IFB. If you're saying to yourself, wow, there's a lot of bubbles on the screen, I'm going to show you bubbles for the RFP and the RFSQ process, which is much more complicated than this. But this is a very streamlined approach if you're able to use an IFB. Okay. All right. RFP. This is probably the most often used procurement solicitation process at the county because this is the most often used where we need to be able to evaluate the best response and the value, the cost. All right. The RFPs are awarded based on a specified evaluated criteria, and cost is not the sole determining factor. What an RFP will do is it'll identify, you know, certain categories of items that are evaluated in the proposal from the vendor, and it'll actually tell the vendor community and the contract community what percentage it's going to be evaluated at. And and then, you know, there will be an evaluation team that will review the proposals to the RFP, and then the pricing will be scored, and it'll be all factored together to come up with the highest ranked proposer based on the evaluated criteria. RFPs are usually used to procure services, tons and tons of services, but we also procure services along with goods. So for example, if ISD has, you know, needs to buy goods, but the services component is more than the 30%, ISD runs an RFP and goes to the board. So even ISD runs RFPs all the time, okay? So the contract could have a large services component along with the purchase of goods. And of course, you know, our large software solutions that require implementation services at the county, whether it could be customizations or configurations. And I'm doing a day 2 IT training. I believe it's next week. So for those interested, you know, please log in for that and register for that. But those are large software procurements are generally run as RFPs. Okay, so here is the bubbles for the workflow for the RFPs. If you're asking yourself, wow, this is a lot more than IFBs, then the answer is yes, there's a lot more involved in an RFP process. Okay, all right. And then, of course, separate from the RFP, we have the RFSQ. And I'm a fan of the RFSQ when we're able to run it for the types of services that we're looking for. An RFSQ stands for Request for Statement of Qualification. Sometimes I see client departments just call it an RFQ, Request for Qualifications. And what that procurement process does is, you know, we put out the RFSQ and we say, hey, here we're looking for a bunch of vendors that meet our predetermined set of qualifications. And then all these people submit, you know, their proposals showing that they meet all of our requirements. And then after we determine that they meet our requirements, they become part of this pool of qualified vendors. And so they all get what we call a master agreement with us. And then they sit in this pool, and as work comes up, we put it out to bid to them, or sometimes, you know, we'll assign it in order, you know, so that we're dividing up the work. Sometimes we put it out for them to bid on a work order solicitation process. Okay, and so the services are usually solicited from all the qualified vendors as the work is needed. Now, I love the RFSQ because all the vendors have to sign the same master agreement because they're doing the same work. And I love to, or my client departments love to be able to tell a vendor, oh, I don't like this contract provision, I want to negotiate it. And we say, nope, too bad. This is an RFSQ, it's a master agreement process, and you're going to sign the same contract as everybody else, or you're out. And they get really nervous because they know that all their competitors have signed the agreement, right? And then they go back to their firm or their company and they say, everybody else signed it, so they said no. And then the firm is like, okay, fine, we'll sign it too. So for that reason alone, I really love it. The other reason why I really like it is it's competitive, right? It's competitive, but it allows a lot of people to be competitive. Whereas our RFPs result in an award to one vendor, you know, who walks away with a contract. In an RFSQ, you have all these folks lined up, and all of these folks can bid multiple times, you know, on the same work as it comes up, right? So it gives them a better chance to win awards, you know, with the contract and, you know, to get a piece of the work. We use RFSQs a lot. We have like auditor contracts like this. We have architectural engineering contracts that are set up like this. We have TESMA contracts where we need telecom work and we put it out as it comes up and people just get to keep bidding on it. Okay. So typical uses: telecommunications, IT services, enterprise services, energy contracts, facility services. So these RFSQs, like I said, result in here's the workflow. But they result in those master agreements. And if you look at the, originally I gave you guys the procurement website for the master agreements. You should definitely take a look at that because those are the master agreements that result from the RFSQ process. Okay. All right. Other unique solicitations I had mentioned, the RFCPs, it's a request for concept papers. We don't use that very much, but sometimes departments like, you know, CEO sometimes will use it, or DHS, just because they're just looking at, you know, like having a vendor come in and give them a concept of how to achieve or handle something. The request for service, RFS, it's used by departments with county council consultation. And then of course we have the RFSI, request for statement of interest. That's also used with county council consideration. And because the RFSI doesn't follow most of the board approved contracting policies, the department has to get advanced board approval to be able to use the RFSI process first, because they're skipping a lot of the board policies. And, you know, ATI CEO Alternatives Incarceration, they have authority to do it, and I believe JCAW does as well. And there may be a few other, but it's a very limited number of departments who have authority to use the RFSI. All right, so back, I'm doing another hypo. So going back to our hypo number 1, your department wants to procure professional consulting services with one contractor. Okay, and the key here is one contractor at a cost of $400,000 a year for 5 years. The department wants to be able to evaluate the bidder's experience and background and have price be a criteria for determining the highest ranked proposer. So if you're asking yourself, is the question, what is the proper procurement solicitation method to use? The answer is yes, that's what I'm asking you guys. So based on what we went over and the 3 types of typical procurement approaches, what would we use here? Well, the answer would be an RFP. That is correct, an RFP, because we want to evaluate the bidder's experience and background, and we want price to be a criteria in the examination process or evaluation process. Excellent. Okay, hypo number 5. Going back to the fire department's hypo, the fire department wants to ask ISD to issue a purchase order for 5 helicopters to help fight fires in this upcoming busy fire season. Before ISD can issue a purchase order, it must competitively solicit for the 5 helicopters. The fire department knows exactly the specifications needed for the helicopters. And again, the question is, what is the correct procurement solicitation approach and why? So I'll pause for you guys to type in your answers, but remember we went through the RFP, the IFB, and the RFSQ process. And the correct answer, I don't see anyone typing in the chat, but the correct answer is an IFB. The reason for the IFB is because they know exactly what the technical specifications are needed for the helicopter. And so they want to put it out, and they just want a helicopter manufacturer to give them exactly what they want. And so they would run it as an IFB, and they're going to award it to the lowest responsible and responsive bidder. Okay, and some examples of minimum qualifications that can apply to the helicopter IFB would be like, you know, you must have been sold, you know, 5 helicopters last year to like a public agency, right? So that way you know that they have experience selling it and selling these types of helicopters. Okay. All right. So, okay. Your department needs to have a pool of qualified vendors available to be able to provide as needed telephone services. Okay. What is the correct procurement solicitation approach? Well, we're not awarding the one. We want a pool of people ready to bid on our work. RFSQ. Good job. Good job, everyone. It's an RFSQ. You want to issue a request for a statement of qualifications, build your pool, give everybody the same master agreement, and have them either bid on stuff as it comes up, or you would circulate the work as it comes up. Okay, what if the department just needs 2 or 3 qualified vendors to provide the same as needed services? What is another possible procurement approach? Another possible procurement approach is actually to do an RFP and then to tell the vendor community to write in your RFP that you're going to award to the top 2 or 3 vendors and the same contract. And that's another way we can do it, where we run an RFP, but instead of picking one person, we say we're picking 2 people or 3 people. And a department that's actually doing that right now and working on that I'm working on their procurement is DPW. They have a procurement out on the street right now where they told the vendor community that they are going to award to the top 2 vendors. Okay. All right, questions or comments? We still got a lot to go. Nothing, please. If you have any questions or comments, type it out in the chat. All right, so now we're looking, so now you know what type of solicitation you're gonna run, right? So I wanna focus on the solicitation process for the RFP. This is the contracting process workflow, but the solicitation process For an IFB is a little bit different. But the most common one that departments will be handling is going to be the RFP. So, as part of the solicitation process, of course, you got to make sure that you get your internal approvals, even procure. I'm working with a client department right now where they want to procure this at the lower levels, and they're still in the process of meeting with their higher level management to be able to procure what they need and to have the department set out the resources. So that's an example where, there's a need that's been identified, and they're still working up through the management process to get the approvals they need. And of course, you need to identify your vendor lists and who you're going to put out to. You need to determine your advertising strategy. And of course, depending on what, type of a solicitation you're doing, you're going to have to make sure that you send your solicitation to the appropriate unions. And that usually applies for, again, our Prop A contracts. And then, of course, you're going to release the solicitation document. And then the board has a policy that anything that is over $10,000 has to be posted on our web then. I'm sorry, under 10,000 has to be posted on our websites. And then depending on what type of a procurement it is and the dollar value, and I will actually have to be posted in different newspapers, and then in certain newspapers that it has to be transcribed in a different language as well, depending on what those requirements are and what you're procuring. Okay. Overview of the solicitation process. You've got to establish an evaluation committee. You have to make sure that you incorporate, and that's your solicitation process, the solicitation requirements review. You have to then conduct, the proposers bidders conference after you pick a winner. And then if there are any addendums, then you would need to issue addendums. And then, you wait to get the proposals and bids in. So the solicitation process is multi-step. And there's a lot going on, right? But this is also part of it. You issue non-responsive letters, you do a disqualification reviews, and then you identify the recommended proposers. And then the ones who are not selected, they get a debriefing. And of course, depending on what type of contract that you're soliciting for, you're going to get a letter of intent from the recommended proposers. So the solicitation process is very multifaceted. I'm going to go through it really quickly so that you guys understand that there's a very large process that follows it. But if you are assigned to work on a procurement, I think it's really, really important that you attend the 3-day countywide contracts training, because it really goes into detail the importance of, the solicitation process and, each of these steps that I'm identifying to you. And ISD does a great job with county counsel walking you through the steps and identifying legal pitfalls and, guidance for it. Okay. Any questions or comments before I move on to the next subject, which is going to be understanding the solicitation document? Okay. I see nothing yet. Okay. So in understanding the solicitation document, once you've determined what type of document procurement you're going to put out, your solicitation document actually has all of these sections in it. It'll have the solicitation information, and it'll have the minimum mandatory requirements. It'll have an introduction and purpose. Again, it'll identify what the minimum mandatories are. It'll identify the county's rights and responsibilities. It'll give notification to proposers what the requirements are. It'll tell the contractor community if the county is going to be doing preference programs for this procurement. And then most importantly, it's going to tell them what the proposal requirements are and what the evaluation sections are going to look like and how things are going to be evaluated and what percentage. And then it'll identify quickly, how the selection process will occur. And then it'll tell the vendors, what the protest process will look like for the procurement. And so it's really important that all of those sections be included in the solicitation document. And so at ISD's intranet site, for the procurement sites, it actually has all of the exemplars that would be used for this. Okay. And so usually the first thing that's attached to the solicitation requirement will be the sample contract. We usually on all of our solicitations will put out the sample contract that we expect the vendor to sign. And we do that because we want them to know what their contract requirements are if they were to get a contract. And of course, you know, some people like to know in advance if they will agree with those contract requirements or they won't bid. You know, we don't want people to bid if they don't want to sign our county contract. Okay. And then we attach to that all of the required department specific forms like Prop A, any other requirements for the solicitation. And then, you know, obviously, often we'll attach all of our appendices, like if they want to request a solicitation requirements review or anything, or, you know, depending if it's a Prop A, they have to identify certain payroll items. Okay, those forms will all be attached to the solicitation document. And this is just an FYI, the solicitation document will always have this kind of a chart or table in the agreement that kind of itemizes when things are due so that the vendor community knows exactly when things are due. And so when you're working on a procurement, you should always make sure that your dates are accurate, all right? Because these are the things that will help to keep your vendors turning in their proposals on time. Okay, really important sections to review is the solicitation information and the minimum mandatory requirements, the proposal requirements, and the evaluation criteria. Obviously, the statement of work, because it's got to be clear what we're asking the vendor to provide, and that's in the statement of work. And then important to review the pricing sheets because that's where they're going to be putting their prices. So the pricing sheet needs to be accurate. And it's important that the sample contract that you're providing makes sense for the type of work that you are soliciting. Okay, minimum mandatory requirements. Why are they so important? Well, they're important because it's a pass-fail requirement. And the county is actually specifying the number of years or, well, the county is specifying like a quantifiable requirement. Usually it's number of years or, you know, number of items cleaned or, you know, the number of street lights, you know, that is being serviced. And the reason for that is, you know, we don't want a small contractor who has maybe serviced, you know, I'll give you the street light example where they've serviced, you know, they've maintained street lights in a small town that only had one street light, right? And that's their experience. You know, the county is vast. There are lots of street lights that we maintain in the county unincorporated in areas that also tie into the incorporated cities. And we're a vast, you know, a geographical area. And so when we put out, you know, for example of our traffic lighting, we will specify, okay, I want somebody who's had experience doing, you know, 2,000 streetlights, you know, and I'm sure the county probably has more than 2,000 streetlights, but we set it at a minimum enough level so that we're capturing folks that have the relevant experience on a larger scale. Okay, and our minimum requirements, we need it to have the ability to demonstrate. And I say this because sometimes I'll get a procurement where the minimum qualifications on its face is so vague that it's not easy to measure because a minimum requirement should be measurable based on, you know, the forms that they give you. Okay, now you guys out there in department land, you got to make sure that when you're working on minimum requirements, that it's not so strict that it limits competition. Okay, and sometimes I find a county department will come to me and say, you know, the minimum requirement is someone who's had 10 contracts with a public agency in 5 years, and the contracts are all for $50 million or more. And I look at that and I'm like, okay, well, how many vendors meet that requirement? And they're like, oh, just one. And I'm like, okay, well, just one. Do you think that if we lowered it, we would get more people? You know, why? You know, and, you know, for the lawyers, right, it's really hard for us to know exactly the client's area, but we test that because, you know, when you put out a competitive solicitation, it's meant to be competitive. Okay, so we do check the minimum qualifications and kind of give it like, you know, a little test to make sure that it's not hiding as a sole source. Okay. And then I'm going to go through this very quickly. The RFP will have the proposal requirements and the evaluation criteria. It'll usually specify, tell me about all the things in your experience doing, you know, a certain thing, A, B, C, or D. Okay. So their proposal will usually come in a business and a cost proposal. The business proposal will put in all of their qualifications, what their plan is to be able to deliver the county services, and that's what's being evaluated. And of course, then you have the cost proposal, which is usually in a different proposal. It comes in two proposals and it's separated from the business proposal so that the pricing doesn't impact the evaluators. Okay, and then you have, as part of the evaluation criteria process, the first thing the contract analyst will do is they'll check that, you know, they've met the minimum requirements, and, you know, that they haven't been debarred and so forth. And of course, we do have sections that talk about the protest policy. And of course, if we have interviews or demonstrations, the RFP will provide instructions on that. Okay, and then of course, the RFP identifies the weight of each evaluation criteria that's identified in the proposal. And then it identifies where the RFP can, where the county can take away points if they don't meet certain requirements. And all of that should be identified in the RFP, because in a protest, a successful protest, our rules require that they have to demonstrate that we did not follow our rules in the RFP. That is one of the ways that you can have a successful protest. And so the RFP needs to be clear on what the rules are, so that everybody is playing on, you know, the same, playing on the same rules, and that the county is applying and following its rules that it said it would follow in the RFP. And here's an example of how you could break out evaluation in the RFP. Sometimes people will say the proposed qualification is 10%. Others will say it's 30% because they really want someone who's really qualified. And then, you know, they'll say living wage compliance might be 10%. Others may say cost, will assign costs at 50%, or 10% or 20%. For an IT contract, we never normally go with a 50%, because sometimes they can really lowball you on the price, and you end up getting a solution that's really cheap, but doesn't meet all of your requirements. But the department does have flexibility to set their criteria percentages, but once they set those criteria percentages, you know, they really are going to have to follow those rules. Okay, and then other factors to consider. Usually there's a financial capability review, and then they also, if it's a living wage contract requirement, we'll look at if they've ever had labor law and payroll violations, because those are all of the things that they would have to disclose. And then all departments generally do a financial analysis review of all the vendors. The vendors are required to turn in financial statements, and then we do a review to make sure that they have the resources to be able to move forward to do the work for the county. Okay. And then what else is attached to the procurement? The sample contract. The sample contract contains all the terms and conditions that we want the contract to adhere to during the term of the contract. And so you usually are working and writing that sample contract with your county counsel. But the great news is you don't start from scratch. ISD has boilerplate exemplars of sample contracts, all different kinds, depending on whether it's a Prop A or non-Prop A contract, or whether it's for services, whether it's a living wage contract, whether it's a contract that results in a master agreement. So you're never starting from scratch. Don't ever feel that you're sitting there and you're writing a contract from scratch. There are boilerplates to start from that have all of the board approved and required policies, as well as contracting sections related to payment and invoicing and so forth. The procurement will also have, procurement document will also have the statement of work. And as I previously mentioned, it's really, you know, the description of what we want the vendor to do. And the statement of work is very, very, very important, because we need to be clear on what we are requiring the vendor to do, because based on what we're requiring the vendor to do, that will inform them on one, whether they can actually do the work for us and should bid in the contract, and two, what the cost is going to be for the work that we are requiring. So if anything, I think the statement of work is really the driver and being in a procurement. And so if out there in department land, you guys should really be working with your project teams to establish really good statements of work so that we're getting accurate proposals and accurate pricing for the work. Okay, and then the procurement document will also have the pricing sheets. And the pricing sheet is going to be different for every solicitation depending on what the deliverables are for the work. Some departments love to use Excel, and they'll set up these complicated formulas, and they have lots of deliverables, and I'm really bad at math. And so the way that I check their pricing sheets is I put $1 into every single cell that has a deliverable price. And if there's 50 deliverables, it should add up to $50. And sometimes it adds up to like a gazillion dollars. And I know there is an error in the formula. And I'm sharing that with you guys because I don't want you to ever send your pricing sheet to your county council and they do my dollar trick. And your formula is broken. That is something that you can check yourself very easily by putting in $1 and making sure that things add up in your formula. Okay. And those are obviously for the very, very, very difficult, I wouldn't say difficult, but very sophisticated procurements where you've got multiple deliverables and you're applying, percentage withholds and things like that. So, but please make sure you check your pricing sheets so that they're accurate. Now, on some of our procurements, pricing is not permitted to be factored in scoring, and that is usually typical on our public works side for our architectural and engineering contracts, which are covered by the Mini-Brooks Act. And in those contracts, they put in, it's almost like a two-step solicitation process where they will turn in the proposal, get selected, and then pricing is negotiated after the fact. And so they don't turn in pricing right away, and that meets the requirements of the Mini-Brooks Act. Okay, so, when you're working on a procurement, obviously you want to determine the payment structure. How are you paying? Are you paying by deliverable? Are you paying for a number of trash cans picked up or a number of parks cleaned, right? Are you paying a fixed monthly fee? Are you paying time and material? How you pay will flow into the contract, and the contract language will be adjusted to reflect how you're paying. And then your pricing schedule that you insert in the procurement will change as well, will be governed by that. So just make sure that, it's clear on how you're going to pay because that impacts several sections of your procurement document. Right, and here's just some examples of a pricing schedule. This one is for parking, right? And it's for management of parking. And so we paid based on revenue sharing. So that's an example of one. Okay. So here's another hypo. Your department sends you an RFP for review before it is released. It contains language about the selection process and evaluation criteria, but does not contain the weighting for each evaluated section. RFP also contains a sample contract and pricing sheet, but not the statement of work. Should the weighting for each evaluated section be listed in the RFP? The answer is very simple. I want to see a lot of yeses in the chat box, because I've done a lot of talking. I hope we're all still out there. But yes, the RFP requirements, the evaluation criteria should be included. Okay, it should be absolutely included in here. Should the statement of work be included in the RFP? Yes, the statement of work needs to be included in the RFP because that's what the bidders are bidding on. And then, how about the protest process? Does the protest process needs to be listed in the RFP? The answer is yes. We have a funny story to share. We actually had a county department once leave out the protest process completely, and a protest came in. And they said, no, you can't do a protest because I didn't include the protest in the protest process. Well, when we asked them why, it was funny. They said, well, I didn't want anybody to protest, right? And so we're like, well, it doesn't work that way because the protest process is also in the board policy. And so it applies whether you accidentally leave it in or not. But, our guidance is you put it in so that people are aware of what the procedure and the process is. Okay. Next, your client department wants to create the following minimum requirements for their office telephone services and RFP. They have general experience with providing the requested services and have a proven track record of success for governmental agencies. So that's the minimum requirement. And remember, we had discussed that it's important that the minimum requirements be measurable. So my question is, are these acceptable minimum requirements? Why or why not? So general experience with providing the requested services and proved track record of success. I still get these guys from my departments. And it's funny because I'm like, okay, well, how do I measure general experience with providing the requested services? What is general experience? Because you don't want a vendor to say, hey, I have general experience. I had 1 year. You didn't put a year in. You didn't put a yearly requirement in. And so these minimum requirements are not acceptable. If this came to me, I would send this back. And I would say, I need some years maybe with the general experience. And, we would like you to identify what the services are instead of just saying requested services, because they may interpret your RFP different from you. And proven track record of success for governmental agencies, that's also very not measurable. But you can change number 2 to say 3 governmental contracts in the last 5 years, or 1 governmental contract, or 2 governmental contracts, or 5 governmental contracts that were in excess of, $500,000. Something that's measurable. Okay, that would be a good minimum requirement. Okay, so I will stop there. Any questions before I move to the proposal evaluation process? Any questions from anyone? All right, no questions. We'll keep going. So now we have gotten to the proposal evaluation process. So now you've put out your procurement, proposals are in. What do you do? Well, under county board rules and our county policy 5.054, you evaluate proposals under the informed averaging methodology. And informed averaging means the evaluators independently determine their scores, and they can revise their scores at their discretion before or after or during their evaluation committee meeting. And then once they independently determine their scores, they get together and they talk about it, and they can adjust their scores if they want to or not. And then once they finalize their scores are averaged, okay, together to get to a final score. But their individual scores are always reflected in the procurement process and the evaluation process. We always maintain the evaluators' individual scores, okay, as part of the process. And that is actually released to proposers who do not win in county procurement. All right, so as part of informed averaging, there's usually a facilitator who manages and oversees the evaluation process. Oftentimes it's the contract analyst who is the facilitator, the contract analyst and the procurement, who's the facilitator to make sure that all the evaluators are on schedule and doing what they're supposed to do, and they're collecting the score. And that contract analyst is also responsible for ensuring that the departments are kept consistent with the board's retention rules for procurements. Okay, that is a departmental responsibility when they're running their procurements. And here's just a general rule: the facilitator, they're not an actual voting member. They just they coordinate any oral interviews or product demonstrations that are needed. They usually conduct all the meetings with the evaluators. And they, of course, collect the evaluator scores and then transfer the scores to the evaluation worksheet. Okay. So when you are developing your solicitation document on the street, you should be also developing your evaluation documents. And they should kind of be done in parallel or very close together, so that your evaluation documents are tracking what's in your solicitation documents. Okay. So just make sure that you're doing it close in time. And of course, your evaluation criteria that's in your evaluation document should match what was identified in your solicitation document. All right, and then developing the evaluation documents. Um, ISD has a lot of models to show you, and I'm going to give you a couple of models right now so that you can take a look at or that you can see. And then I guess my best advice that I've given over the years about developing the evaluation documents is I really would like county departments to use, 1,000 point or 10,000 point scales when they are doing that to help translate the percentages that they identify in the RFP categories. The reason for that is it creates a larger margin of points so that if you have a winner, someone might be, 1,000 points ahead of somebody else or 500 points ahead of somebody else. That sounds a lot better than, using 100-point scale where the difference in points is like 1 point, right? Because it's really hard, I think, for people to accept that they lost by 1 point, and so I think when you create a larger point scale, it allows more flexibility and for your evaluators to evaluate and give more points along the spectrum. But when you're starting with a smaller scale of 100 points, makes it really, really difficult, to try and find a distinction, because then you're breaking points. You're breaking 1 point, 2 points. Okay. All right. So just more tips on the evaluation document and being able to follow the various categories and to assess according to what's in the RFP and matching what's in the evaluation documents. And then, of course, cost. The cost proposal of a proposal for a procurement is often is always scored unless price is not a factor, like in the A&E contracts where the Mini Broke Act prohibits that. It is the cost structure usually anywhere from like 20 to 40%. On a lot of IT contracts, they're only 10% because we really want to be a good system, and pricing may not be a big factor. But on some other procurements where, we really want the software to be, affordable, cost can be higher. Okay. But cost is usually scored, and the formula for scoring costs is always put in the procurement documents so that the vendors know how the county is going to be scoring their cost proposal. Okay, so here's an example of a evaluation worksheet, right? Where you're going to lay out so you'll match this. So if it says proposer's background experience is 5%, proposer's qualifications is 10%. Usually your procurement document, your RFP will identify that this is being scored at 10%. So the vendor knows that they're being scored at 10%. And then your evaluation document will track that and then break out, the different score categories so that your evaluators can fill this out. So here's an example of a worksheet, evaluation worksheet. Here's another one where for handling references. Here's another one for evaluation worksheet. So you guys can see, I love these. When I work with my clients, I like this setup and reviewing it because it's very clear how each evaluator marked the vendors. And I love this comment section down here. I usually will review these comment sections to see if there's been any weird comments or biased comments written in here. So this setup is very helpful for running a clean procurement. Okay, and then here's another one, just more of these. And, here's just an example of how, if an evaluator changes their score, they will scratch that out. And then this is what the evaluation worksheet looks like. And then here is a cost worksheet that shows how cost is structured. Okay, and how you can score cost. And this formula that's usually in the cost proposal sheet matches the formula that you put in your RFP. And then this is just a final worksheet that puts all of the scoring and prices together. Okay, and then most important for the evaluation process, you need to make sure that the vendors submit on time and that you have to verify that a proposer has not been debarred. You have to make sure that they've met the minimum requirements. okay, of the contract, and that's done by the contract analyst. And if all of these things are met, then they go to the evaluation committee to have their proposal evaluated. And then here's the evaluation committee. There's usually 3 to 5 members on the committee. They have to be able to work within certain time frames so that they can complete the process. Our rules do permit SME subject matter experts to assist with technical issues. So sometimes they'll review an item and provide their technical expertise, but the evaluators are still independently evaluating. And of course, they can't have bias or conflicts of interest, okay, the evaluators when they're on the committee. All right, so I am going to stop there. I am 2/3 of the way through the process and through the County Contracting 101. And it is 8:10. So what I think we're going to do, since there's still some really good information and overview, is we'll schedule a second training. All right, let me turn my camera on. I don't know if I turned my camera on or not. But we will do a second training where we will finish the 1/3, and then we will do the IT training. And for the IT folks out there, the IT training, you're going to get a great IT overview on how we contract for software. It's not the same per se as professional services. And so you will see an entire dynamic that's a little bit different. Okay, before we break for today, is there any questions that anyone has that I can answer? Raise your hands if we've covered a lot. I think we've covered a lot. Excellent. And we will send out the PowerPoint presentation for today's training to the group.
Truc, that was a lot of information, and thank you so much. It was so packed wealth of information. And so we're gonna continue next week first with finishing this off and then do the IT contract, right? That's the plan.
We could do that, or we could break it out. So why don't we
Okay.
discuss? Does everyone have a preference? Would you guys want to combine the two, or you want separate sessions? Anyone?
Comments? Feedback?
Well, we'll discuss, but we could also do
Okay.
that as well.
Sounds good. Thank you so much. I'm gonna have to review the recording several times.
Right,
But this
and
is so good.
yeah,
Mhm.
this is intended to be an overview, but I do suggest that everyone also do the 3-day contracts training as well.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Okay, thank you so much, everybody. Thank you again, Truc. And we really appreciate you doing this, especially for those that really needs to really understand all the intricacies of the contracting. And all right, everybody, we will hope to see you next week. If not, check out our website and take a look for future events and workshops. Okay. All right. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you, everyone.